Hey there everyone! Today I'm going to show you how I made this miniature dollhouse dresser. This dresser is 1/12 scale and all the dresser drawers open on it as well. I'm going to show you step by step how I made it, and I hope you enjoy! You're going to need craft plywood. This is 1/8 of an inch thick. I got this at a craft store, but you can also order it online. You're going to need veneer edging. This is an iron-on kind of edging, so you're going to need an iron as well. And this is what it looks like outside of the packaging. This is called a magnetic jig, which is very useful when it comes to gluing tiny pieces together. I'd highly recommend you buy it when you're doing projects like this. You're going to need wood filler and a putty knife in order to fill in any kind of cracks or dings or anything with the project while you're working on it. There's the iron. Make sure your iron doesn't have any water in it when you are ironing on the pieces. You do not need steam for this project. I used wood glue and super glue. You're gonna need a stain. This one happens to be called golden oak, but you can use whatever stain you would like for the top. This is the case for the drawer pulls that I use. Obviously there's none in there right now because I already used them all up, but it's by the company Classics. You're gonna wanna use some files. I have miniature files, which are really handy when it comes to sanding things down. You're also gonna need sandpaper. 220 grit is what I used. And you can honestly just use the sandpaper if you want, if you don't have the files, but the files make it a little bit easier. These are called miter shears, and I use these to cut tiny pieces of wood when I need it. I use mostly the table saw and a miter saw for this project. I also used a miniature miter box to cut angles, which I needed to cut a couple angles for this dresser. Not too many this time. These are what I ended up cutting off and turning into legs. Obviously you guys won't have those pieces because it's from a dollhouse, but I would use wooden beads if you have wooden beads. These are nails that I used for the top drawer pulls. I ended up cutting the nail down to size in order for it to fit into the drawer. For the color, I just used paint that I had sitting around. This one's called Owl Gray. You can use whatever off-white color you want. You can paint it whatever color you wish to paint it, but that's what I used. This is a tiny trim colonial panel molding piece, which I got at Home Depot. You can look for it online. Now, I understand some of you might not have these tiny nails. I happen to have these laying around because I did tape wiring, which I needed those tiny nails for. I ended up using these tiny nails for the drawer pulls, and I used this micro drill set in order to make the tiny holes in order to inset the nails. And then I covered up the nails with this black paint to match the color of the drawer pulls, which are black. So whenever I do a project, I always get inspiration by looking up images online. So in this case, this is what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll even find a piece in real life and just take a picture on my phone, but in this case I looked it up. This is a picture of real life measurements of a dresser, which I'm going to use in order to convert into 1/12 scale. I always have a calculator next to me when I'm doing this. And I already ahead of time drew a picture of the dresser. And I also wrote down most of the measurements. But here I am finalizing the measurements in inches. So what I usually do is I will take the full size measurement and divide it by 12 in order to get the small 1/12 scale measurement. So in this case, I divided it and got 5.33333, which is an annoying number to work with, so I rounded it down to just 5 inches. So the dresser itself is going to be 5 inches long. Then I go ahead and do the rest of the measurements as well. Here I am cutting all the pieces. This is called a Rockwell blade runner. It is kind of like a table saw, but it also can be used like a scroll saw as well. So it's kind of a multi-purpose saw, but I definitely love using it. Here are the measurements that you're going to need for the dresser itself. This is not including the drawers. I will show you the measurements for the drawers later on in this video. You're going to need duplicates of many of them because I ended up doubling up some of the sides of the dresser to make them a little bit thicker than 1/8 of an inch. So make sure you cut out all of these, and that way you can glue them together and assemble them. So this is the magnetic jig I was talking about. This is going to help keep your piece nice and square. That way when it comes time to slide in the drawers, it won't be all crooked and hard for the drawers to fit. Make sure you sand off all the little imperfections on the side before you glue anything together. That way it won't be in the way. Here I am doing that right now. So I ended up doubling up the sides of the dresser and the bottom of the dresser. The top part of the dresser is not doubled up, just the sides and the bottom. Use the tiny magnets to hold the piece together as it's drying, so that way all the sides will be nice and square. Here I am just marking out where I'm going to put the spacers between each drawer, so that way each drawer has something to sit on. The spacers are 1/8 inch thick, because that's how thick the plywood is. I want to keep in mind the width and the length of each front of the drawer, because that's what's going to be sliding in and being flush in the front of the dresser. So I use those measurements that I've already written down to determine where to put them on the piece. I used a square wooden dowel as I was gluing in the spacers, just as a guide to make sure that the spacers were nice and straight, because you don't want them to be crooked, otherwise the drawers won't go in correctly. So basically, I made sure that the spacers were lining straight up against the wooden dowel while looking at my marks that I marked on the side as a guide to make sure that they're going in nice and straight.
Here I am just quickly sanding the piece before I go ahead and add some wood filler to cover up the cracks and any kind of dings. In this case, I just had a couple cracks on the side that I wanted to get rid of so you wouldn't notice it when I go to paint it. Here I have written down all the cutouts for the drawers. And here I am just sanding down the wood filler. Here I am gluing together each individual drawer. When you're doing this, make sure that it slides into the correct space, because it could be a tight fit. You might have to file down the sides a bit more. I did a lot of sanding to make sure they all fit nice and snug, but you don't want them to fit too snug, otherwise the drawer won't open. So it's a lot of trial and error with sanding. As you can see, I'm sanding as I'm going along. So I'm using a dotting tool to apply the glue on the sides, but you could use a toothpick or anything kind of small in order to spread the glue around the sides of the wood. That way you're not using way too much glue, because too much glue is never good. Here I am going in with the veneer. I'm basically measuring out and cutting out strips in order to go over the front of the dresser. That just gives it a nice look, a nice finished look, because with plywood you can see the layers of the wood on the side, and I wanted it to not look like that, so I used the veneer to kind of cover that up. Technically, you don't need to do this step because you're going to be painting the piece, but I think it looks a lot better with the veneer on the side. Just use the iron to iron on the veneer pieces. The opposite side of the veneer has this glue that's on it, so it'll automatically activate as soon as you heat it up, and it should cure and dry within seconds, so that way you don't have to wait for it to dry at all. Here I am measuring and cutting the trim piece for the bottom part of the dresser. I used the miter box to cut the 45-degree angles needed for the corners of the dresser. If you notice, I use blue painter's tape to wrap around the wood sometimes. I do that whenever I make cuts because the tape around the wood seems to make the cut more clean, so I do that quite often. I also use the blue tape to keep things in place before I glue them, just to see how it looks and how the pieces fit together. When you're done with all the cuts, just use some wood glue and glue the trim pieces on. Here I am just mixing some wood glue with some of the sawdust that I created while cutting the wood, and I'm literally just using it to patch up a tiny little gap that I noticed on the trim piece, just so that way that disappears. Now I'm just putting some trim pieces on all of the drawers with some thin strips of veneer, and I'm doing the same process. I'm just ironing them on. So the next step you're going to want to do is take the 1/8 inch thick board and cut it. You're going to want to cut it to be overhanging the top of the dresser. So you might want to do like 1/8 of an inch overhang on all sides except for the back part. The back part should be flush. And use whatever stain color you want. I already had done this previously, so you're not going to see me staining it. Here I am showing you quickly how I cut the pieces that I found from my dollhouse to make the legs. I understand you guys won't have this exact piece, so what I would use is either some wooden beads, or you could cut some wooden dowels down to size if you'd like. You can get as creative as you want, but I think the beads would look really good. Some rounded beads, or whatever beads you find. There's so many options out there. Now you're just going to want to glue the legs onto the piece, and the next step is painting the entire piece. For the drawers, all you have to worry about painting is the fronts. You don't have to do the insides or anything like that. And same with the dresser itself, just the edging pieces should be painted. You don't have to go inside and paint all that because no one's going to see that. Plus, if you paint that, it's gonna make the drawers stick. So make sure you don't do that.
give the piece a nice rustic look, you don't have to do this step if you don't want to. I chose to do it. I decided to use 220 grit sandpaper to sand down the edges to give it a nice worn and rustic appearance. Next, you glue down the stained top piece for the dresser, and I used some elastic bands just to kind of hold it in place as it dried. Now we're going to put the drawer knobs on the top 3 little drawers, and that drawer knob is just made out of a nail. I took the nail and I used pliers to kind of bend it until it snapped into a tiny piece. I did not show this on camera, but it's fairly easy to do. As soon as you start bending it, the metal gets weak and it snaps in half. And then I used the top part with the nail head as the drawer knob. And I ended up using a drill, my little micro drill, to create a hole so that way I could put the knob right on in with some Gorilla Glue. Here are the drawer pulls. You didn't see them in the beginning of the video because I had already installed them onto this piece, but now you get to see them. So basically, at the edge of each drawer pull, there's a tiny hole that you can put a nail through, but unfortunately, it didn't come with nails. So, like I told you guys, I ended up having tiny leftover nails after my tape wire that I used for the dollhouse. And I understand if you guys don't have that, you could just glue it straight on to the drawer if you would like. You don't have to do this step. But if you do have tiny enough nails to fit, I would recommend you doing this. It just makes the drawer pull stronger and it won't snap off the piece as easily. So it just makes it more sturdy. And again, I used the drill to drill little holes and glue it in with Gorilla Glue. If you are working with the little nails, I'd recommend you using tweezers as you're placing them in, because using your fingers are just going to get in the way. So the tweezers help out a lot. So this last step, I'm putting some black paint over the nails that I put in. The nails happen to be gold and I didn't want it to look gold. So I'm just covering it up with some black paint. Again, you don't have to do this step if you're not putting the nails in. So here I am putting the finished drawers in. I made sure that the drawers went in their certain spots. Otherwise, if I put the wrong drawer in the wrong spot, it got stuck because that's how picky these drawers happen to become. But I'm really happy how this piece turned out and I hope you guys enjoy. And I hope this tutorial was helpful for you guys. And if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And I look forward to posting some more videos.